Okay, amazing. Right, we're live. Um, Welcome to History Indoors. This week our talk is ready for a close-up Mary the First in film with the wonderful Dr. Johanna Strong. And I can already see some people adding comments and things, so please do comment and like away. And if you would like, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, but you can also follow Jo. Her details are on the screen at the moment. Johanna, how are you? Would you like to introduce yourself? um,
I'm good. I feel like I'm a little scattered. I spent most of today thinking it was the weekend and then realized it was Tuesday. So it's kind of a shock. But yes, I'm good. I am, I guess, as an introduction, I have recently, but not so recently, finished my PhD at Winchester, which is where I met the lovely Amy, who has very nicely offered to host my talk tonight. And my research focused on Mary the First and how she was remembered in about the 100 years after her death. So I'm kind of going off that a little bit for the talk today, looking at how she's portrayed in film.
I was about to say I'm very excited for this. I've read a lot of Jo's work, and this is the first time that we've gone into the 20th and 21st centuries. So you're in for a treat tonight. So Jo, whenever you're ready.
Beautiful. Wonderful. So thank you, Amy, for hosting, and for Amy and Michael for doing the behind the scenes as well for me. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this talk with you all. Hopefully, you have guessed from the title that we're going to be looking at representations of Mary I in film and television. And I'm going to be looking specifically at the 1998 Elizabeth, at Horrible Histories, at the Tudors, and finally becoming Elizabeth. In particular, there are some overarching themes that are really going to guide my talk today. And these themes are persecution, marriage, pregnancy, leadership, and authority, and the way that the narrative about Mary is changing. I also want to spend some time today looking at how Mary and Elizabeth are often juxtaposed in film and television. So that'll be another aspect as well that we will examine. I've already gone too far too fast. A note before we begin delving into these representations in earnest, though, I will be talking briefly about pregnancy in today's talk. The slides will be clearly labeled, so if you'd prefer not to hear discussions about fertility and pregnancy and child loss, please do mute while those slides are on the screen. That discussion will be quite brief, so please don't think you're missing anything massive if you would prefer not to listen to those slides. So to get us started is the 1998 Elizabeth with Kathy Burke as Mary. Because I know that it's very confusing when films are named after people, anytime that I use Elizabeth without clarification or in a context that sounds strange for it to have been a person, I am referring to the film. When I am referring to the person, I will try to make that abundantly clear. As you can see from the image, the Mary that is depicted here is really, in a sense, a frumpy Mary, for lack of a better term. She's depicted as being quite bleak, and her clothing is predominantly in dark colors, and her expression is almost consistently one of either anger or pain. This Mary shows very little mercy to those around her and is always on the verge of hysterics, being comforted by her fool, Jane. Elizabeth begins in 1554, the second year of Mary's reign and the year in which she marries the future Philip II of Spain. From the beginning, this Mary is presented as a fervent Catholic, a childless queen. Again, words from the film, not my own. Anything that appears in quotation marks on the screen are pulled directly from these productions and are not my own interpretation or wording. because some of it are words that I would not necessarily use to describe figures historical or present. The film's opening scene is the execution of three heretics accused of denying the Pope's authority and the tenets of the Catholic faith. I have a few issues with the opening scene and with this depiction of Mary's reign, but we'll start with my smallest complaint. And before anyone gets upset that one of my complaints is we are executing people, that is unfortunately, you can check past talks. That is just part of how heresy is handled in the day. In the film, as the camera pans out from those being executed, we hear one of the men in the crowd shout out, "God bless you, Master Ridley." Bear in mind that the film has just informed us that the year is 1554. Nicholas Ridley and Hugh Latimer, burned at the stake together in Oxford, were not executed until the 16th of October, 1555. I know this might seem like a very small gripe, but the film very much suggests that Mary's reign really begins in 1554, when in fact she comes to the throne in July of 1553. It also suggests that the first thing she did as queen was burn heretics, which is simply not the case. My issue with this is that Mary doesn't quietly come to the throne in 1553, just as a matter of course. She has to rally her supporters in order to march on London to claim her throne from Queen Jane, whom Edward has named his heir. I know this likely wasn't a part of the film because the focus is, understandably, on Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is not really present for Mary's coup, but to suggest that Mary's reign begins a year in, and to suggest that she doesn't have to fight for the throne, really minimizes the authority that she holds and the popular support that she held at the time. Second, to suggest that Mary comes to the throne and immediately begins burning at the stake as a punishment for heresy is just simply historically inaccurate. Bringing Latimer and Ridley's execution forward a year in the film from 1555 to 54 makes it seem that Mary comes to the throne as a vindictive, bitter older woman who has nothing better to do than to get back at everyone who has previously hurt her. In fact, and I am very conscious of the time already, so I can answer this more in questions if people are interested. Mary's regime does not institute these new heresy laws until quite a bit into her reign, which changes the narrative of the film from the reality to the one that is presented on screen. These opening scenes really play into Mary as the bloody queen of legend and lore. While, again, I completely agree that in today's world, we should not be persecuting people for their religious beliefs, and we certainly should not be using capital punishment, in Mary's day and age, as I've said, this is usual practice. And I think the Elizabeth film really fails to recognize that. The second main theme that came out of watching this film was the interpretation of Mary and Philip's wedding. In a scene which shows Mary and Philip sitting together, Mary is very much portrayed as the doting wife, seeking physical affection from her husband. Philip, on the other hand, is presented as being quite disdaining of Mary's affection and as being an unloving husband. In reality, despite the fact that, of course, this marriage also brought significant political benefits to each member of the couple, this was a royal marriage that eventually built on respect and love, albeit probably in the early modern definition of love in marriage. Often, Philip is seen as an absent husband. And of course, he is absent frequently. Once his father, Charles V, abdicates from his throne, Philip, as his heir, is left to rule in a variety of realms. Philip's attention is naturally drawn away from England, and he has to go to his territories to secure his power. He doesn't leave England because he's disgusted by Mary, but more so because he logistically needs to be elsewhere. When Mary died, Philip was genuinely saddened by the loss of his wife, a fact which Elizabeth really does not depict in its representation of their relationship. The juxtaposition with the Princess Elizabeth in the next scene also really highlights the perception of Mary's marriage as one which is devoid of love. Where Mary is sitting in a darkened room with a husband who seemingly does not love her, Elizabeth is frolicking in glorious sunshine with her ladies, and, most importantly for this parallel, with Robert Dudley, who is understood as a best friend, if not a paramour, of Elizabeth's. Where Mary is portrayed as being in a loveless marriage, Elizabeth is depicted surrounded by love. Yet another example of how this film's narrative twists Mary's relationship and surroundings in order to present her half sister in the best possible light. So, this is the slide for anyone who's not particularly wanting to hear about pregnancy. This is your chance to mute until we get to the next slide. As I mentioned on the slide when we looked at persecution, and again, happy to take questions about this at the end as well, Mary is first presented in this film as being childless. Although this seems like a statement of fact, which it certainly is, in that Mary comes to the throne not having been married previously and not having children, it does play into a dated narrative that really shows Mary as a failure of a queen because she does not produce an heir from her and Philip's marriage. In the film Elizabeth, when the Duke of Norfolk learns that Mary is pregnant, we see a conversation between him and a lady of the court, who informs him that Philip hasn't shared a bed with Mary in quite a while, suggesting either that Mary is lying or she's been cheating on Philip. Again, what perhaps might seem harmless enough drivel of the court actually gives us a view into another dated interpretation of Mary, that she's too innocent or naive or ignorant to actually know what it means to be pregnant. Mary in the court thought that she was pregnant twice, though I think only the first pregnancy was likely to have been the growth of a fetus. In 1554 to 5, Mary prepared for the birth of a child, including organizing her lying in, a ritual which secluded the mother from male company and kept her in her bedchamber until the baby was born. By the summer of 1555, all acknowledged that there was no birth, and they all quietly admitted that a child was not going to appear. What the depiction of this pregnancy in the film is missing is that this quite likely was actually a pregnancy which perhaps ended in miscarriage. And it's not simply a figment of the imagination of a hysterical woman, as the film tends to portray her. The fact that the film really plays into Mary convincing herself she's pregnant, despite the apparent impossibility if Philip is indeed absent, it really draws on these previous interpretations of Mary as a historical and as a hysterical, she's also historical, and desperate woman. And so this brings us to these comparisons between Mary and Elizabeth. In the film, this dark, drab, austere interior in which Mary lives is often contrasted to the bright, airy, and cheerful scenes with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, on the right, in case we weren't too sure, and I promise I have not touched the video quality of that. That is the difference between Mary's scenes and Elizabeth's. Elizabeth in the film is presented as a sort of breath of fresh air, in contrast to Mary's traditional identity, which is something further ingrained by parallels between Mary's religion and Elizabeth's, where Elizabeth is presented as someone seeking the middle ground in religion, where Mary strives for fanaticism. This presentation of Mary and Elizabeth relies on a specific understanding of history that believes strongly in hindsight. The Elizabeth presented in this film is very much a product of our own historical hindsight, knowing as we do that Elizabeth tries during her reign to embrace a middle ground between Catholic and Protestant. As a result, the film really falls into this trap, giving these characters knowledge and context which they wouldn't have had at the time. I know that's been quite a quick move through the film, and again, happy to answer questions at the end. But I would like to make sure we get to all of the films and TV shows in hopefully a timely manner. So let's move on now to Horrible Histories. A special shout out here goes to Amy, who I will lovingly say subjected me to Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights music video, which I had heretofore been happy enough to have lived my life not seeing. But she said that I couldn't understand this video from Horrible Histories if I didn't understand the original. I will never be able to unsee Kate Bush's version, but here we are. The Horrible Histories Mary song presents Mary very much as a catastrophe who married Philip, who then abandons her, who loses Calais before her reign is subjected to floods, famine, and flu. It categorizes Mary's reign as short, but not that sweet. But it does present Elizabeth as the one largely responsible for Mary's legacy. And so, of course, I have to give them credit for that. One of the terrifying Tudors compilation video, and all of these are available on YouTube. Most of them are on the Horrible Histories YouTube page. This terrifying Tudors compilation presents Mary in a Bloody Mary persona, a queen who was scary, but who ultimately only receives a few seconds of video time between Edward and Elizabeth. To be fair, each of the monarchs are really only given a few seconds, so I can't complain too much about that. What I can complain about, though, is the categorization of Mary. I know that these are videos, songs, books aimed primarily at children and those of us young at heart, and that kids don't always have the capacity for nuance that adult historians do. But I do think it's important that we don't dumb down history for kids. I know it's engaging and easy to remember, but Horrible Histories' depictions of Mary as being bloody and scary really don't do justice to her reign. Yes, it was absolutely defined by persecution, but Mary's reign is also defined by massive improvements to the navy, to revaluing the coinage, which had been significant issues for previous Tudor monarchs. I'm not asking for a golden portrayal of Mary, but simply one of a more rounded historical figure. Though again, perhaps I am asking too much unfairly of a series that genuinely does a really good job at getting kids and adults interested in history in an engaging and memorable way. And before everyone comes at me for judging their childhood soundtracks and viewing, I do want to say that I really appreciate what Horrible Histories does in that it invites readers and viewers into new topics and gets them interested. But I don't think we should only be reading Horrible Histories for the facts. Again, persecution is a massive part of Mary's portrayal in Horrible Histories. And it certainly was one of the first things I thought of when I saw this Mary surrounded by fog or smoke. I'm not really sure. They never clarify. I know, again, this is based on the original Kate Bush music video, but in Mary's case, I do think it conjures preconceived notions of Mary before Sarah Hadland even begins singing. In a Horrible Histories news report segment called The Catholic Report, Mary's reign is identified for its burning of 300 Protestants at the stake. I'm not here to tell you that's wrong. There were Protestants burned at the stake during Mary's reign. But what I would like to do is put this into perspective, where I feel like, again, in today's day and age, explaining and contextualizing this history in no way means that I'm condoning it as an action. So, as I say, burning people at the stake is horrible. The dialogue in the clip quite rightly notes this. But burning as a punishment for heresy was quite usual at the time. Historians of Mary have even noted that Edward VI, Mary's predecessor, would likely have brought back burning as a punishment for heresy had he lived longer. I know this is a really tricky topic and one that has to be dealt with sensitively because it is so outside of what we class as acceptable today. But I think it's important to put the actions done during Mary's regime into their historical context. Again, Horrible Histories is a great way to be introduced to history, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that their perspective is from a very specific point. And of course, a short dialogue or a song cannot embody all of the historical nuance. The last thing I want to talk about with Horrible Histories is their portrayal of Mary and Philip's marriage. Much like the film Elizabeth, Horrible Histories, Mary and Philip love story presents theirs as an unhappy marriage. In this clip, Mary and Philip meet for the first time at their wedding, but in reality, they had met beforehand in Winchester, and they had quite a nice conversation beforehand. I know this doesn't seem like nearly enough time to get to know someone before marriage, but the point stands for the early modern world. In this version, Philip doesn't want Mary. He simply wants the power of having control over England. So he plans to marry her and then leave her so that he can get that power without needing to actually live with her. As I pointed out when we were looking at Elizabeth from 1998, Mary didn't actually play a massive part in Philip's decision to leave. He had to go in order to take care of a realm that he had recently acquired from his father. Horrible History's depiction that Mary was lonely and bitter, again, their words, and that she went mad and died is certainly nowhere near the truth. Nor is the statement that Mary's death was a weight off Philip, as we talked through when we were looking at Elizabeth. This brings us to the Tudors. I'm sure many of you will have seen this series, and I have covered it previously on podcasts, and I will more than happily make sure that that link is available in the comments section in the next few days for you all to check out if you would like more of an in-depth look at the Tudors specifically. The one thing I really want to focus on with the Tudors is that it portrays Mary and her humanity. The biggest thing that I think the Tudors as a show did for Mary was to present her as an actual rounded person. She's not simply Henry VIII's forgotten daughter, or Catherine of Aragon's proud daughter, or a devout Catholic, or a penniless princess. She's a daughter, a sister, a courtier, a princess, a servant, a lonely teenager, all at once. We see, for perhaps the first time in a production like this, a Mary who feels like someone who would actually have existed, who is caught between all sorts of different situations and different people, and who is just trying to make the best decisions she can with the information she has at the time, being incredibly conscious of how that will affect her personally and in terms of the succession. Again, apologies for not going into this too much in detail, but I did want to focus on the way that the Tudors really provides a bridge between these traditional initial interpretations of Mary on screen and the most recent one that we've had. So hopefully you all saw this one coming as the last TV production in which Mary plays a massive role. I think it's largely thanks to the Tudors in the 2000s that really allows for a show like Becoming Elizabeth to show such a powerful, self-aware Mary in 2022. Again, this series really served to humanize Mary, and I think this scene shown on the slide is really one of the best ones for this. It's not a massive scene. I will admit that I finished the series way too recently for this talk. And I already could not tell you what is happening in this scene because I was so entranced by the judgment, the choice that the director had made in creating a scene where Mary was playing cards. This was one of Mary's favorite pastimes, and I absolutely love that it made it into the show. Not everything about Mary is persecution or marriage or trying to secure her place on the throne. Sometimes she's just a woman who likes to play cards. And I loved that this scene really embodied how Becoming Elizabeth so artfully depicted the complexities of Mary's existence, caught again between so many different people and so many different ideas, just trying to make her way through in a way that put her in the best position possible. Understandably, given everything else that we've looked at in this talk, religion is a big component of how Mary is depicted in Becoming Elizabeth. She's introduced as a Catholic princess, and much of her storyline deals with needing to choose between her faith and political expediency. Edward VI, for those who may not be as aware, is quite a devout Protestant. He's keen to ensure that England remains Protestant and that all aspects of the Catholic faith and worship are erased. As a result of his views, his court was strongly anti-Catholic, which is seen in the Becoming Elizabeth scene, where we have a court mask which depicts the Pope and an obvious condemnation of him. Mary is understandably quite uncomfortable and upset in this scene, and is eventually forced to leave the room to avoid the outward anti-Catholic rhetoric happening around her. All at court know that Mary is a devout Catholic, as do we as viewers. And so this scene really shows the choice that Mary is being forced to make between staying at court with her brother and her king and leaving court in order to stay true to her faith. Ultimately, as the series shows, and as is what happened in reality, Mary chooses to leave court in order to be able to continue worshiping in the Catholic tradition. But that certainly is not an easy choice for her. Mary's identity as a Catholic continually puts her in opposition to Edward. She feels she cannot stay at court and be a Catholic, and yet to be true to herself means rejecting the orders and wishes of her monarch. This then puts Mary in a very difficult spot because she cannot turn to family for support and instead ends up in this depiction turning to the Spanish ambassador who offers her safety. Becoming Elizabeth does a really good job at depicting these complex relationships and the way that they are constantly changing and shifting. Again, it gives us this depiction of Mary where her actions are clear consequences of the situations and relationships in which she finds herself. But Becoming Elizabeth also relies on viewer knowledge of Mary's reign, particularly in terms of persecution. When Mary's chapel is ransacked of its traditionally Catholic components, Mary's response is that the perpetrator, and I quote, will burn for this, in the same way that he has burned her religious items. Similarly, the series really demonstrates the complexities of Mary's attempts to get her heart, her religion, and her country on the same page when she comes to the realization in the final episodes that Protestantism has taken root and that she will have to take action as queen if she is to stop it. She declares that if England has to burn to stop this evil, Protestantism, then I will see it done. This really sets the stage for that component of Mary's reign, but it also does so in a way that makes it obvious that these actions don't come from a place of vindication, but from a place of extreme hurt on Mary's part. It touches on this difficult aspect of Mary's reign, but does so in a way that still presents Mary as a rounded historical figure. And I have to commend the show for how they've done that. Becoming Elizabeth also quite skillfully handles discussions of Mary's marriage and her commitment to staying in England, which again, I think really humanizes her and shows her as a product of the difficult decisions that she has had to make. I wish I had all the time in the world to talk about this now, but for the sake of time, let's turn to the depiction of Mary's experience in Becoming Elizabeth. One of my favorite things with how this series deals with Mary's age is that they don't cast her as this middle aged woman, but instead they present her as being experienced. That Mary has been around a block a few times and knows how complicated and unpredictable and scheming the court is really allows her as a character to be set up to give advice to Elizabeth. Granted, that advice isn't always given in the best way. For example, when Thomas Seymour is executed, Elizabeth is quite upset, especially because of the relationship and the way that the series chooses to portray it. Mary gives some incredibly valuable advice to the grieving Elizabeth, that basically one must endure what one cannot change, and that Elizabeth really just has to get on with life after Seymour's death. Mary admits in this moment that she does not bring comfort, but she does bring the truth. It's quite a cold side that we see of Mary here, telling her sister to get over the execution of the man she loved. But it's also presented in a way that doesn't make Mary completely heartless in this scene. While it certainly isn't how I would want my sister to react, it does really highlight the tough lessons that Mary's had to learn, and that the part of the way that she loves Elizabeth is by trying to save her from this future pain. The series also does really well in presenting the political experience that Mary already has. Early on in the series, Catherine Parr describes Mary as having the ambition of the Lord Protector. Quite a damning statement from Catherine, because the Lord Protector is her enemy. But this description does acknowledge that the historical Mary and the Mary in Becoming Elizabeth both knew what it was they wanted and made decisions based on how it would get Mary to where she wanted to be. I think what also makes the scene memorable for me is that it easily could have been a moment to cast Mary as a scheming figure and as a threat to Edward. Instead, and I think this is partly because of the characterization of Catherine, this acknowledgement of Mary's ambition comes across, at least for me, as a moment of awe for viewers towards Mary rather than as condemnation. This recasting of a negative interpretation of ambition into a more positive one also largely works because of the overall storyline with Mary, which works to explain why she is the way she is based on her experiences. The series sets itself up well for potential future episodes because it highlights the hard work that Mary has done in order to secure her position. At Framlingham, it shows how Mary has worked to cultivate a network of supporters around her, something that she historically did do, and upon which she called when she needed to seize the throne from Queen Jane. The series isn't afraid to shy away from Mary actively seeking to protect herself, and it actually ends up acknowledging what a strong figure Mary is, as the real historical person was. When Edward's Privy Council is being readjusted towards the end of the series, Mary is suggested as a sort of regent and is offered the role of protector, again signifying the experience that she has at court and the experience she has in dealing with complex political situations. And this really highlights that Mary's future reign is built on experience and not simply on birthright. The scene doesn't necessarily have to be included in order to progress the story, but I do think it serves to give another dimension to Mary as a politically savvy royal. The last theme that I really want to look at is the relationship between Mary and Elizabeth as it's portrayed in Becoming Elizabeth. This series does really well at acknowledging and highlighting that Mary and Elizabeth are constantly in competition with each other. They have a sort of symbiotic relationship where they can't both exist, but they do need to rely on each other for safety, guidance, and support. I think what really embodies this is a scene where Mary simultaneously has the ability, and I apologize, it's not awful language, where Mary has the ability to refer to Anne Boleyn as the Great Whore, while still trying to protect Elizabeth and give her valuable advice. I guess talk about a backhanded compliment. Their complex relationship as sisters, but also as competitors, really stands out in this series. And I think this leads to Mary being depicted as a much more rounded figure. And Elizabeth in these episodes is not afraid to acknowledge that actually she's learned immensely from Mary. Elizabeth realizes when she's effectively under house arrest or surveillance at Sir Anthony Denny's that Mary is a smart woman who knows how the court works and who knows how courtiers work, and that she has real advice for Elizabeth as Elizabeth begins to navigate life at court. Elizabeth later directly acknowledges that she should have listened to Mary when Mary invited her to live at Framlingham. But instead of choosing to go to Framlingham, Elizabeth stays with Catherine Parr and Thomas Seymour. This scene and this explicit acknowledgement from Elizabeth is again a reminder that Mary's experience at court and her advice to Elizabeth, had it been heeded, would have led Elizabeth to very different situations, and ones which perhaps would have been a lot safer for her. The series also really uses parallel scenes to highlight how very similar and yet how vastly different these two royal lives are. At Catherine Parr's Requiem Mass, the Mass that is said once she has died, Mary is shown kneeling for the service, while the parallel scene shows Elizabeth kneeling in front of Edward. This really emphasizes that the choice is between being true to one's faith and being true to one's monarch. That choice overlaps for Elizabeth much more than it does for Mary. Similarly, when Elizabeth is riding out to meet the Danish prince to whom she will be betrothed, or not, as it turns out, sorry for the spoiler, we simultaneously see Mary riding for the coast where a Spanish ship lies in wait. Again, these sisters are taking the same actions. They are on the same journey to the throne, but they are doing it in very different ways. Again, neither is shown as being the better option or as being unquestionably correct in their decisions. An aspect of the script and the directing which I really appreciate. It humanizes both Elizabeth and Mary, and it adds a dimension to Mary, which I don't think we often get in television and movie productions. This is not simply a hate-hate relationship between Mary and Elizabeth, but it's a complex up and down set of emotions that draws on their past experiences, their religion, and their ambitions. And so this brings us both to the end of Becoming Elizabeth and to the end of this talk. But before Amy comes back to open it up for questions, I want to leave you with some thoughts on how I hope you and television and movie productions will choose to remember Mary. Episode 8 of Becoming Elizabeth perfectly lays out the Mary I think should be most often depicted. It's the Mary who enters London to rapturous applause, reminding us and those around her that she had incredible popular support. It's the Mary who nurses Edward while he is ill and dying, regardless of the fact that he has dogged her for years to convert to Protestantism and has denied her the right to practice her faith in public. It's the Mary who, in the final moments of the series, is able to simultaneously regret some of her actions while standing by others. It's this complex Mary which I think we should most remember. This Mary who, like all of us, is a product of her time, her situation, her relationships, and her political environment. Thank you all very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you have.
Hello, I'm back. Thank you for a wonderful talk, Jo. So much to think about. My brain, I've made a whole bunch of different pages of notes. I think it was lovely to see that tracked track that change from your very early choice to now over that kind of 30-year period, I think was really wonderful. And lots of things that I kind of recognized. If anybody, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. Joe and I have also done a previous talk on Queens on Screen. And there was a couple of times where I was like, oh, so if anybody wants to learn about Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots' depiction in film, do go listen to that, because a couple of things Joe mentioned in terms of darkness and light and that sort of thing were very relevant to what Joe and I talked about there. So if anybody has any comments, please do, or questions even, please do pop them in the chat, and I will ask them to Joe, and I've got a couple of my own. So lots of people saying fantastic talk, Joe. They really enjoyed it. So I'm going to start with a question from Ashley that says, Joe, in your opinion, what is the most accurate depiction of Mary on screen? And if it's different, why? And if it's different, what is your favourite depiction and why? Thank you very much, Michael. Michael's doing some clever things. So if you could answer Ashley's question, Joanna.
Absolutely. I think I'm still kind of digesting becoming Elizabeth, because I will admit that I did not watch it when it came out because life. So I'm still figuring out how I feel about it. But I think I would have to say at this point that is probably the most accurate depiction of Mary that I've seen. And I realize this is probably about to start a Twitter war on depictions of Mary on film. But I think it is the most accurate because it it doesn't shy away from showing the good and the bad. It doesn't shy away from presenting her as someone who can come across as quite ruthless. But I think it also does a really good job of showing her in those loving moments. And so I think in that sense it's the most faithful to who I think she would have been as a person, based on who I know I am as a person, based on how I know that those around me are as people, and that we all have good days, we all have bad days. We all say things that we mean really well, but they come out wrong. Um, and so I think in that sense, that is the one that is maybe truest to history. Um, but I think I would have to say that my favorite one is probably the Mary of the Tudors, because I was very late joining the Tudors, the TV show, not the people, because my parents decided I was too young when it came out to watch it. So I first watched it as a PhD student. But that
Shout
was
out to Joe's
kind of my
parents who are
first,
definitely watching.
yeah, they know. But that was, in a sense, my first Mary that I think showed her as a real person, and not just as an evil caricature. And I think she will always hold, that Sarah Bolger will always hold a very special place as kind of the first good Mary, and the first rounded representation.
That actually ties really beautifully into a question that we had from Louise, which said, do you feel that more recent portrayals of Mary humanize her more than films pre-2000? And I think you've just pretty much answered that beautifully, but did you want to expand on it at all?
Yeah. I don't know what it is. I mean, I do know what it is, but I don't know what it is about the change in the millennium that somehow people start questioning things again. There is a massive shift in the academic literature at that point that really starts to challenge this traditional Mary, who is cruel, and I'm trying to think of how one of the famous historians basically describes her as rather stupid. I forget the other words, but none of them were flattering. And there's a beginning in academia to push against that. And I think that that's probably also the point where we start to see that in popular culture. And obviously, popular culture is a bit slower sometimes to change with regard to challenging narratives and changing how we fundamentally understand our own history. But absolutely, I think the most recent depictions of Mary very much humanize her on the whole more than the ones pre 2000 do, though there are some outliers um, in representation. But I do think we are slowly getting to a a normal Mary is one who is a rounded figure as opposed to a victim or evil.
Brilliant, thank you. I was just going to say, actually, just really quickly jumping on something from the Tudors one. In the Tudors picture, because I have not seen it for about 12 years, I will hold up my hands.
You need to fix that.
Yeah, I've got the DVD literally about a foot away. But my question about it was going to be in the picture where she's holding the baby. Is that Edward or is that Mary? Not Mary, Elizabeth. Because I assumed it was Edward because would she have been there? Yeah.
I this is again going to show it. I'm like 99.9% sure that that is Edward,
Okay.
because she acts as godmother for him, which
Right.
is a massive
Yeah.
honor.
And and that was actually
But it
just
just
something from the Becoming Elizabeth. So did she actually get offered? Do you know? Did she actually get offered that position, or do we not
this
know
is the
this?
thing. Because I think I focus so much more on what happens after she dies. I'm sure we can get if there are any Mary historians who are in the room, I'm sure they will be able to chime in. Um, I know that very much she's seen as negatively and positively as the heir to Edward. Um, but I don't know enough to confidently give an answer.
That's totally fair. Lots of wonderful questions and stuff going up in the chat. So, yeah, so many things. One comment on your historians. Someone said that's Elton being bigoted and stupid.
I was trying to
Which
think of his name. Yes, yes.
that
He has some quite damning words for Mary.
yeah. And
He's the someone whose book I am forced to own, but which I do not enjoy owning.
I'm sure we all have ones like that as historians. So to go to a more light-hearted one, well, maybe light-hearted, maybe not. I'm struggling to find the actual question now. Ah, here we go. Fantastic talk, Joe. If you were able to choose a part of Mary's life to depict in a film, what would it be? So you've talked about all the things that are depicted. Is there something that you think we are missing? Um,
I think it would be absolutely amazing to have a really good modern historiography, like a modern interpretation of Mary's actual reign. And that we actually get to see those 5 years. And I think I I would especially be interested in how she negotiates the relationship with Philip because I think it is quite a complex relationship as they all are. But it's also one where you're in a long distance relationship, you're both monarchs, you're trying to have an heir. It's just stress upon stress upon stress. And I I personally I would love to see a view into how that might have been from her as a person, as opposed to kind of, I know from the sources this is how she dealt with it as a queen, but I would love to see those kind of personal things, the way that the Tudors and Becoming Elizabeth personalize her journey to the throne. I would love to see that continued on the throne.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I would love to see that. And you mentioned some really wonderful locations, which I know Joe and I have a little bit of love for Framlingham Castle in our hearts. So I feel like if you could also do some really wonderful location shots, if you could do the wedding at Winchester, I think as Winchester PhD students, that would make us very happy. Again, oh my gosh, you have so many excited questions. So I'm going to ask this one from SG Michael, which is why do you think becoming Elizabeth made Mary make comments about burning, um, um, whilst refraining from making Elizabeth talk about torture, drawing, quartering, persecuting Catholics, and slavery? And this actually also goes in with a question that I wrote down, which was about why do you think that Elizabeth gets to be the beloved one and Mary doesn't? And I think those two things sit really well together. And I already know your answer, so please enlighten everybody else.
I think so much of it is, for becoming Elizabeth especially, is because it's becoming Elizabeth. And to become Elizabeth, you don't want to make the heroine, quote unquote, of a series, which everyone then comes to hate. And I think part of that is they're wanting to set it up that this is Elizabeth's story and she is, I don't want to say she's the good one because she obviously does things in the series that are questionable at the time and in modern perspectives. Um, but I think it's one of those of it's more common knowledge, the persecution of Protestants under Mary, than it is common knowledge, the persecution of Catholics under Elizabeth. And I know that is changing. But I think again, popular culture is sometimes slow to challenge those things. I was on a tour of St. James over the weekend, and there is, if you ever get into St. James, sign up for the Royal Collection Trust newsletter if you want info about it. Um, this was not a private tour. I'm not that fancy.
And this
Um,
is not an advert either.
no, not an advert. I'm also not that fancy. Um, they have a gorgeous original, or part of it is an original Elizabethan fireplace. And I got excited when I saw the ER that was missing the two in the middle. I was very excited. And the comment from the tour leader is basically, yeah, she was a pretty good queen. I was like, oh well, I study Mary, so I have a little bit of a different view. And she goes, oh yep, okay, fair enough. But it's one of those of the assumption is that everyone likes Elizabeth until they tell you they don't, or they tell you they have issues with portrayal. And I think that that's part of why Elizabeth gets characterized in a lot of these productions the way that she is, because it's she's such an ingrained part of English culture and England's understanding of itself. And so if we challenge that, it leads to that existential crisis, which, fair enough, many people don't want to deal with.
And another kind of shameless plug for both Joe and myself, there will definitely be work around this area coming out in the near future. So do follow Joe on Twitter, and you will definitely see more. And yeah, we've got a couple of people chiming in as well on what they'd like to see from Mary. They'd love to see the coronation of England's first crowned queen. That would be amazing. I would love that.
I mean,
And
we
more on her
already have the
relationship with Philip.
costumes. Just saying.
Just yeah, and actually very recently Johanna and I went to the National Portrait Gallery, and I don't know if anyone's been recently, but they've now got a wonderful painting of Elizabeth, and it recognizes that they are Mary's clothes that she is wearing. So actually I would love a scene where you get to see both of them in that outfit. That would make me very happy. I feel like, yeah, me and Joe will make this for you. So we've
Yeah.
still got loads of other questions. Let me have a look. Um, Someone said, do you think we'll ever actually get a film or TV series dedicated to Mary? Do you think it will happen? When do you think it will happen? Obviously, we'd love Johanna to be in charge.
I would love for this to happen. I think we're almost at a place where something the public would very much enjoy. That's one of the big issues with doing something focused only on Mary, is that there's relative concern that it's not going to make enough money, and no one's going to watch it. Who is Mary? Why would people want to watch that? She's no Elizabeth. She's no Henry VIII. Um, but I think, especially given the feedback on Becoming Elizabeth from people who are not Tudor historians saying like Mary stole the show in every scene she was in, I think that's really indicative that I think we're almost to the point where we could genuinely have a Mary show dedicated to her that will be popular culture and in a rounded way. So I hope it's happening soon. If anyone knows anyone, I'm happy to be put in touch with people. I would love for that to happen.
Yeah, I think it would be fantastic, wouldn't it? And I think it's like we've been talking about all along, really. One of the big things is that balance between popular culture productions in terms of finances and appeal, and how you drive a narrative and all of those things. And most non-historical narratives will have a good person and a bad person, and we all know that no person is wholly one or the other, and we find that in our historical fiction, that yeah, they try to create those binaries, and then you end up with the negative depictions of Mary that we have, because she can't be if it's all about Elizabeth. So yeah, hopefully we'll have a much better rounded, wonderful depiction soon. What else have we got? So I've got another question from SG about, what is the reason, in your opinion, that they wrote Mary as calling Anne names? I think this is um, in Becoming Elizabeth,
Becoming Elizabeth.
when historically she's famously recorded as not even knowing the meaning of the word.
I think part of it is that it's an easy way, I think, to show a depth of emotion. Sometimes when things are not going your way, you just want to yell a swear word, you want to yell a bad word. We've all done it. And I think that's it's one of, I think, the easiest ways to show that depth of emotion, that Mary in that moment doesn't take the 2 seconds to stop and think of a different way of wording it. Is that's what comes out. And I think part of it is to really make the point that there is this history between Mary and Elizabeth, and there is this history between Mary and Anne Boleyn. And it's, I think it just adds a certain emotional aspect and adds a certain shock factor to the audience. And I think, I mean, maybe it's just that I'm used to watching television where they beep everything, and then I bought Becoming Elizabeth on iTunes and nothing is beeped. But it does take me by surprise every time someone says something stronger than kind of a normal something you would say in front of a kid. And I think part of that is just to show that emotion and to show, I guess, to jolt viewers out of that complacency, I guess. Um, and I think it really draws on, again, those perceptions and the historical interpretations of Anne Boleyn, and the way that she is portrayed either as kind of the virgin or the whore, when she's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, as we said, real life is a lot more complicated.
It is.
I
Pretty messy.
had a little giggle halfway through Joe's very serious answer there, because there has been a comment that says, Mary, the all singing, dancing musical with Bloody Marys served in the premiere, but Bloody Marys is in inverted commas, so don't you worry.
I will admit, over over the summer, I don't think I've told my parents this yet either, but I'm sure I will. I'm about to get texts being like, "Show us the pictures." Um, for the first time in my life, I ordered. It was a non-alcoholic, but I ordered a Bloody Mary, and my poor sister was in a public restaurant on a busy night. I'm like, you gotta take my picture. You gotta take my picture with this. And I was so excited. And I'm sure everyone's like, this girl is crazy. Like, she's not old enough for her first drink. Why is she so excited about this? Yes. I know I've brought out my tea towel, which I can't get because my computer is currently blocking the entrance to my kitchen. My beautiful tea towel from History Hit that has the portrait of Mary. Oh, I can't get there fast enough. There we go. That portrait of Mary, but she's holding the ingredients for a Bloody Mary cocktail, and that just brings me great joy.
Amazing. I'm going to ask one more question, and if anyone has any more questions, please do put them in the chat now. We have a question. Where did it go? Sorry, my doorbell is going. If anyone can hear that, because it's Halloween, and there's lots of little ghosts and
As
witches outside the door.
as you find that, I had a great fashion conundrum tonight. As you're looking for that question, because if anyone has seen a talk previously that I've given in person or online, I have some beautiful Mary earrings, and they match my Mary necklace. But today I've gone with the Mary necklace instead of the earrings because I wanted to wear my pumpkin little jack-o'-lantern earrings. So if you thought writing the talk was
You
the
can
hard thing,
honestly
the fashion choices.
you can honestly tell going back through Joe's talk, like what mood she's in, what season it is it, all through her amazing collection of earrings. So I have found the question. It's from Rich Bethy, for you to
Okay.
find. So it's a bit out of the topic, but will you talk more about Mary's pregnancy anytime soon? If I'm not mistaken, you hinted that there's a possibility that there was a fetus. So Joe, take it away. Again, this was a question I was going to ask, so here you go.
Yes. Um, that's a really hard one because obviously we we cannot in 2023 magically go back and find out. We can't go, here's the pregnancy test, can you take it? And so we may never know. We will never know with 100% accuracy. But there is some research that Peter Stafel is doing, and I want to give him full credit for this one. That he's kind of been looking at, is it a pregnancy? Is it not a pregnancy? Is it uh, what has been called a phantom pregnancy? And I think the conclusions that he is making make sense to me. Um, but in my very cryptic way, I will leave that for him and future publications, which absolutely I will reshare on my Instagram and Twitter, um, as and when. But I do think and have thought for quite a while that the chances of her being pregnant the first time are higher than the chances of her being pregnant the second time. Um, so yes, that is my very cryptic answer that I don't want to steal thunder, but I also want to give credit where credit is due.
Thank you. I'm sure Peter will appreciate that. And I think it's also just really important, like we've just come out of baby loss awareness 2 weeks in October. I think it's also really important to recognise that whilst we don't necessarily have all the information, whether or not she was actually pregnant, if she believed she was pregnant, she was going through those emotions and she was grieving that loss of a potential child, even if we could prove 100% that it didn't happen. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think look out for work on pregnancy, because I promise you it's coming, on early modern pregnancy, and how we kind of deal with it now.
Yeah.
It's definitely on the horizon. So I think that's going to be some really valuable scholarship from Peter, and from lots of other wonderful people. So I think we have time for one more question. Joe, should we have one more?
Yeah.
Um, so
We're looking
fantastic.
at the same question.
Yeah, I think we are. Yeah.
I hope we
Um,
are.
so fantastic images, Joe. Is that the one you'd like?
Thank you. Yes, that is the one I was looking at.
Wonderful. So yes, Joe, you have put wonderful images in your presentation. But do you think it's time to move away from the more, and I always say this wrong, Iworth, portraits of Mary, and start recognizing the
Yeah.
other images presenting her? Can you tell us a bit more about that? A bit more about the other images?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are the two. And I did get kind of poked fun at by friends when they saw the picture I had chosen as the promo, and they went, "Why that one?" And I think those two are just the most recognizable images of Mary, and I think it's self-perpetuating in a way that because they're recognizable, we use them because you see it and you go, "Oh, that's Mary." But the more we use them, the more they become cemented as that's the only image of Mary. And I would say absolutely like, not to discredit them and discard them altogether. But I think there's so many other depictions that maybe tell us even more about Mary and about her queenship and about her as a person, as a ruler, as a wife, as a potential mother. I think there are other images, and again, Peter's done incredible work on this iconography of the ways that the coinage for the coins that different socioeconomic classes would have seen the most often have different presentations of Mary and of Mary and Philip. And I think those should absolutely be seen more often. And I think I included in the slides the one medal where Mary is looking a little pregnant. Um, and like I think it's images like that that are made at specific moments for specific people with specific interpretations that they are wanting to get across. And I think those should absolutely come to light way more often than they do because just the information that they can give you by looking at them is immense. And I think as much as we have so many portraits of Elizabeth the first, where you go, okay, hold on, like which is the rainbow portrait, which is the Ditchley portrait, which what is this, what is that? And you think there's so many that you recognize with Elizabeth. And I think there's so many depictions of Mary that go beyond the two more ones. Um, and so I think yeah, I don't advocate going in and kind of ripping them off the wall and never showing them. But I do think it's incredibly valuable to be showing these other depictions and representations, particularly of ones that Mary would have had to personally approve. I
Yeah, I
think they
completely
show a
agree.
lot.
I think it's really fascinating as well, isn't it? Because if we're only looking at two pictures all of the time,
Mhm.
even though they can potentially tell us a lot more than people are usually letting them tell us, but if we're only looking at those two pictures, we're also kind of saying, well, her reign was really short and it doesn't matter, and there's only two pictures. But there isn't only two pictures, and I think that's maybe as well where kind of increasing putting those in talks, putting them on display, completely
Yeah,
changes kind of how
yeah,
we perceive her in that way. So yeah, fantastic. I think we have pretty much done most questions. Lots of thank yous, and yeah, lots of people saying you did a great job, Joe. So thank you very much. And lots of people adding comments about how they thought for each different film and stuff like that. So yeah, is there anything you'd like to kind of promote about Mary that you're doing in the next few months, Joe, at all? For anyone
oh my
interested?
gosh, no pressure. I think the best place to find out about what I'm doing next is Twitter and Instagram. I also have a website, which is Dr. Johanna Strong. So Dr. and then my first and last name .ca. That has all the podcasts that I've been on. It has all of the either talks that I've given or recordings of the talks for those that are available. Please check that out, and also get in touch. I absolutely love love chatting about Mary, and would love to have a film about her if anyone has connections.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And because Jo is so modest, I'm just going to say that she has some more podcasts on the horizon, which will be linked into that website. So, yeah. And yeah, I think that's everything for this evening. Please do like the video. The more likes we get, the kind of better the algorithm goes. And yeah, please carry on adding comments and things, any thoughts you've got for Jo, anything that you would like to share. But thank you very much, and we'll hopefully see you next time.
Thank you for